Hello, and welcome to The Silent Report, a podcast by Silent Witness, dedicated to shining the light on cold cases that often go unseen and unheard. My name is Rab Paquette. I'm a board member of Silent Witness. I'm also past president, and I'm the host of The Silent Report. Today, we're joined by Troy Hillman, author of Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter. Troy is a former CPA turned homicide cold case detective. Troy helped solve one of Arizona's most haunting cold cases after decades without answer. Welcome, Troy. Welcome to The Silent Report.
Thank you, Rab. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much. Will you tell us about what it was like growing up in your small town, becoming a CPA, and your journey from CPA to cold case detective?
Yeah, so I grew up in a town, it was Decatur, Illinois. It was less than 100,000 people, smack dab in the state of Illinois, and it was largely agrarian economy. There was some crime, but basically I didn't see, I had a normal upbringing. And then I found myself at the University of Illinois and plunged into, of all things, accounting. And so I ended up doing really, really well on the CPA exam and inexplicably being named a partner material. And was kind of jettisoned into this fast track to climb the ropes, so to speak, at a major international firm in Chicago. And it was just miserable. And it was just kind of sitting in a cubicle. And I had been indoctrinated by all types of cop detective shows as a child and kid growing up. We feasted on Clint Eastwood and Charles Bronson, and I just enjoyed every moment of that. So that was going on, and I had this conflict going on to the point where I started to really do ride-alongs with police departments and test, and I ended up coming out to Phoenix, Arizona. I drove 2,000 miles with my father lecturing me the whole way in a U-Haul saying, what are you doing? You don't know anybody in Phoenix. You're going to get killed. You have this college education. You have the CPA. You have the world paved in front of you. So, and it ended up being a great decision. And but I kind of just lost. It just blew my mind, the level of crime that I kind of got into as a patrol officer.
So it sounds like your family wasn't completely sure of your transition, but was it a very difficult transition for you in your mind to make from CPA to police officer?
No, they thought I was nuts. And I think the majority of my family, how can you, not only the pay cut, but the just the career change, massive career change. But I knew in my heart that it was the right move. So I always kind of joke with people. I put down my calculator and briefcase and picked up a gun and a badge. So it was a great move for me personally.
In the academy, when you first joined, because of your background and your education, were you dubbed as a financial crimes guy, or did they think you were going to be something different?
Yeah, I mean, in fact, the academy was kind of, it was difficult, and there were parts of it that, not having been in the military, not having going from more of a college-based to this type of paramilitary organization, but I kind of had a carpool mate that we would go to or ride to the academy together every morning, and he was an ex-Marine, and he would tell me, "Hey, Troy, here's how you spit shine your shoes. Here's how you shoot. Here's how you do all this tactical stuff." And I taught him how to, basically the nuances of the criminal law and writing. It was kind of like Shawshank Redemption, where he helped people with their finances and taxes. So, but yeah, I was pegged early on to be a financial crimes detective, and I actually did a stint in financial crimes, and then I promoted to sergeant and was put back out on the streets.
And then you eventually ended up as a detective in the cold case division. How many cold cases are you faced with when you first walk into the cold case division?
Yeah, so I was an administrative sergeant working for the commander in the Violent Crimes Bureau of Phoenix PD. And I got to know all the different lieutenants, the robbery lieutenant, the homicide lieutenant, the gangs, the assaults. And I really got the homicide lieutenant, he got visibly excited by Excel spreadsheets like I did. So we had that in common. And he said, "Troy, with your background as a CPA, I'd really like to think about coming over and kind of revamping our cold case squad, because it's kind of a mess right now." And I said, "Mess? What am I getting into?" And so I got in there, and the individual was promoting to lieutenant that I took over for in 2008. And I said, hey, Matt, I said, how many cold cases do we have? And he said, well, we think around 2,500. And I said, we think from a accounting perspective, I'm like, how do we not know? How do we not know how many cases are solved and unsolved? And so that kind of blew my mind. And then we had no definition for what a cold case was. There were just massive challenges. And I thought initially, I'm going to do my year assignment here and get the heck out and go do something else.
I could see from a perspective of a CPA that must have been really daunting for you.
Yeah, I mean, just it was just so, everything was there, but it was just completely unorganized. Year after year, detectives would retire and they would just leave stuff. And so it kind of became this cold cases job as assignment to kind of organize all these cold cases and get them together and figure out a kind of a plan of attack, because what we were doing wasn't working. We were, a family member would call in and say, hey, what's the status of my loved one's case? And the homicide cold case detective or I would print it out, and it would be hundreds of pages long. We'd review the case, get back to the family member, and then we'd shred everything, and we'd do the same thing every 6 months or year on that particular case. And for 2,500, that's horribly inefficient. So we kind of started rocking and rolling. We got a case review process with a solvability index. We figured out how to organize things and really developed a good system for solving cold cases.
Troy is the author of this book, Chasing Down the Zombie Hunter. In this book, he profiles a case that he actually solved after many years of hard work. He didn't receive the case until the case was 20 years old. Let's talk about the specific cases in your book, Troy.
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify that it was a complete team effort solving this case, kind of from start to finish. There was a massive amount of work done on the front end. And I always say with cold cases, if it's not done right on the front end by the original investigators, then there's no hope for us on the back end. So I was able to assemble a team of passionate expert detectives, and we plotted 3.5 years on this particular case while balancing those other 2,500 cases. So it was a daunting task, and it was what I call a roller coaster ride, where we had the ups and downs, body blow to go to a boxing analogy, and the headshots, and we were just tired at the end of the 3.5 years.
With all the cold cases you worked on, what inspired you to write about this particular case?
So we ended up solving this case and using some out of the box techniques to solve this cold case, and it was two of the most horrific cold cases that had happened in Arizona, probably the Western United States. So once we got through that, we were on kind of cloud nine. We developed this recipe. We'd been solving 12 to 15 cold cases a year back to the 70s. And then I get a call. They were basically budget cuts. And the current leadership at that time decided to cut cold case homicide, kind of dismantle the squad. And I'll never forget the impartial phone call that came over the phone and said, hey, you're going back to patrol. And we're basically dismantling the cold case squad. So from that point forward, I decided I said, I have to tell this story, because everybody kept telling us on this particular case that the guy's dead. Don't give up. It's why work it? He's been in the system for a year, the DNA system, and he's just move on. And we didn't give up. And we spent 3.5 years finding this guy and taking a serial killer off the streets of Phoenix. And to me, that matters. And so I kind of had this passion for telling people, hey, cold cases matter. We can't give up on these cases at the year mark. We have to go back. We have to look at them. And the expectation for the regular homicide detective to go back and look at these cases beyond a year is they're already taking way too many cases. So to me, it's mission impossible for them. And there needs to be a passionate cold case group working these cases.
Let's take a moment to thank our presenting sponsors, Circle K. Their support makes this podcast possible and helps us continue our mission of education, awareness, and community impact. We're proud to partner with organizations that believe in creating safer communities. Thank you for supporting Silent Witness. Will you discuss the prophetic profiler, Richard Walter, and your relationship with him and how he impacted the case?
Yeah, and again, I alluded to this as a journey, kind of a roller coaster ride. The meeting of the VDOC Society, the think tank back in Philadelphia, of just this upper echelon of law enforcement people that are looking at these cases was phenomenal. And then to meet the profiler, Richard Walter, he kind of took us under his wing. Very eccentric, brilliant guy. He's controversial, but he wasn't afraid to give us an opinion. And he used a lot of, and I put this in the book, he used a lot of interesting word choices like methinks and ergo, and he just liked to talk in kind of this code. So half of my brain was trying to decipher what he was saying, and then the other half is just to track what he was telling me about the serial killer.
The cases specifically in the book, would you care to describe those a little bit for us?
Yeah, so back in November of 1992, a woman by the name of Angela Brasso, she was turning 22 on the date of her murder, which is sad, and she ends up going for a bike ride. She lives up north, I-17 and Cactus, that area, at an apartment complex at the time was named Woodstone. She goes on a bike ride at dusk. Her boyfriend stays behind. He's baking her a cake for her birthday. He typically rode with her. And this night he didn't. And then the next day she was found brutally murdered, beheaded, almost cut in half. Just horrific things happened. The killer did to her. And her bike was missing. Her head was missing, and her headphones. So he had kept trophies. So this was a horrific. This wasn't just your standard. I hate to say it, but your standard murder. This was over the top. This was a fantasy. And this was definitely the work of a serial killer.
And how long after the first murder did the second murder take place that's profiled in the book?
Yeah, so about 10 months later, a 17-year-old Arcadia High School student, that's on the eastern side of Phoenix, she decided to ride at dusk the canal bank or the canal path up towards Metro Center. So that was of September of 1993 that she was murdered. And she was found floating the next day, and she was redressed in a tight bodysuit that was meant for like a 10-year-old child. So it was just bizarre. It was just there was lots of she had been carved on, and there was just weird fantasies that were going on in this killer's mind.
How did you tie those two cases together?
DNA was in its infancy, 92, 93, and I think they were able to 94. They were able to compare basically what was left at the crime scene, the evidence that left by the perpetrator at the crime scene, and say it was definitively the same guy. They weren't able to upload that, though, into the national database until 1999, 2000. That's when the FBI had the CODIS national database in operation.
And about 2000 is when DNA really came into being really in play and useful for murder cases?
Yeah, and it has been developing ever since. The amount of stuff that the scientists can do with DNA, it's pretty remarkable.
These cases are absolutely, some of the worst murders ever in Phoenix, the history of Phoenix. Did you stay motivated to work on these through your career as a cold case detective?
Yeah, I mean, we assembled the team, and we were trying to balance the 2,500 other cold cases, and that is for even 5 detectives and myself, it was really difficult to try to, you do the math, and it's just almost hundreds of cases each, and you're just trying to stay afloat. But we were able to carve out time to focus on this case, and I think we all became obsessed by it because he left clues, and I put a lot of that in the book. There were a lot of things in the tunnel and the reasons he did things, and there was a lot of religious symbolism that we were trying to unlock. What was he trying to tell us? He was leaving us messages, and we just couldn't decipher. It was something like the Zodiac Killer. We just didn't know what he was trying to tell us.
It sounds absolutely daunting to have multiple cold cases working at the same time, and it must be extremely frustrating not to have resolution on something right away for you. How do you keep going?
Yeah, and as a former CPA accountant, every debit has a credit, so you're trying to rationalize that. And for every cold case we solve, there's probably 100 more at least that never get solved, and that's sad. And it was hard. That was the hardest part of my job, was to tell the family members, hey, don't give up hope. We're not going to get rid of the evidence. We're going to keep working the case. But we have to move on to some of the more solvable, and those were typically had fingerprints, DNA, a lot of community involvement, that kind of thing. So, but it just tears at your heart after a while.
I can imagine. Does community involvement play a role in many cold cases?
Yeah, and I've always been an advocate of involving the media to feature cold cases because I think it's important. You never know when relationships change. And that's, you've heard of the old saying, the scorn of an ex-girlfriend or wife. So that it's important. You just never know when something's going to flip. So if you continue to kind of bombard the public and say, hey, we've got this person either missing or this person murdered and we need your help. Somebody at some point may say something, and that's important. And that's part of the silent witness involvement too, is to get people to, even if they don't want to come forward directly to the police, they can come forward anonymously.
As a former CPA and somebody that gets excited about spreadsheets, was your attention to detail key to solving this case?
Yeah, I think we were plotting through the files, and the files were massive. But we also had some huge breaks. We had some help, and we weren't afraid to kind of leave our ego at the door and ask for help. The VDOC Society, and the genetic genealogist was a huge help in fast tracking kind of our work.
Will you explain how the genetic genealogist contacted you and how her process works?
Yeah, so I got a voicemail that was forwarded to me by one of my detectives, Marianne, and she said, hey, boss, she's like, I got this kind of weird email, and this is 2014. This is 4 years before they used it on the Golden State Killer, and it kind of became famous. So we're 4 years prior. And so Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick says, hey, I'm from this company called Identifinders, and I think I can apply genealogy to your murders. And so I kind of scratched my head. I picked up the phone. I called the lab and asked Kelly, my counterpart over at the lab, and I said, is this crazy, or is there anything can you use genealogy on cold cases or murders? And she said, yeah, I think it's going to be a thing. So we actually kind of created a meeting of Dr. Colleen Fitzpatrick and the lab team to make sure to kind of vet her out and see, is she legit, that kind of thing. And, law enforcement does that. We vet everybody out because we want to make sure that we know who we're talking to. But she came over and gave a kind of a presentation to my team. And she has a PhD from Duke, and just kind of blew our minds how she could take a strand of DNA and spit out. It was almost like the flux capacitor on Back to the Future. It was like, how can you do this? So we were like, well, for $750, it's worth a shot. We were flying detectives all over the place to get DNA. We might as well apply that $750 to her, and there was nothing to lose. But unfortunately, government and law enforcement sometimes is a little resilient to change. And this kind of use of technology was, there were a lot of administrators that were scared of that we may be giving out too much information or doing something crazy. And it was called voodoo or witchcraft at one point. So but it ended up being a massive break in the case. And
she helped direct you kind of in the direction you needed to go.
Yeah, she called me, and I'll never forget it. It was around the Christmas time in 2014, early 2015, and I had extended family in town. I just had my first daughter, and she was about 6 months old, so we were kind of focused on her. And I told my wife, I said, I got to get up and take this phone call. It's from Dr. Fitzpatrick. And she said, I stepped into a room, and she said, hey, Troy, I think his surname is Miller. And I started to think, well, Smith obviously was very popular, but I think I Googled it. Miller was the 7th most common name in the United States at the time. So I said, well, that's a help, but I don't know how big a help that is. At least maybe we've narrowed things down a little. But then I thought something that the VDOC Society told us is he's in your files, that this guy was a subtype, a Dahmer, a Bundy, and that he would be in your files. And our files were massive. So we went and we're like, I jetted out of the house and I said, I have to go check out the files.
How did you maintain the relationship with your wife and your family, putting all this time and personal interest into a case like this?
Well, I think they they knew my personality and my team's personality as a type A driver, kind of passionate. And so they understood it. And I did try to balance, I didn't just say, hey, here's the infant, you completely, because she's a nurse, she works hard. So I tried to balance that. But yeah, it was a tough balancing act for sure.
I really like how you included that balancing act in your book a little bit, so we could see that you were a real person, not just some machine down at the police department trying to solve cases.
Yeah, no, I tried to put family first, but also, you get wrapped up in these cases and you want to solve them.
What's next?
I'm in the middle of, I'm on the Silent Witness Board, which was an honor. I volunteer for Parents Who Murder Children. I've trademarked my slogan, Cold Cases Matter. I'm a big advocate of kind of forcing leaders locally and statewide to try to really focus on the problem of the amount of cold cases we have, not only homicides, but missing persons. Because there's just too many. And when we got in there and looked at these cases, there's a lot of, especially women, younger women that are in these files. And so we can't just take a blind eye and move on. We, as police departments and communities, we need to focus, because the secondary, there's always two edges to a sword, and so to speak. And the other one is the killer is out there. And he's done it once, and he very likely could do it again. So we need to focus on these cold cases.
Your wisdom and expertise in working on cold cases is very impressive. We really appreciate your efforts. Will you tell us about how Silent Witness works a little bit and describe how Silent Witness impacts the general community?
Yeah, Silent Witness is a phenomenal organization, and we worked kind of hand in hand while I was in cold case, because a lot of our cases we would put on Silent Witness. Basically, the mission is to make communities safer by generating anonymous tips where people can get a reward, and they can give information that is passed on directly to the police department, but not have to endanger themselves. Because there's a lot of people in communities that are, unfortunately, terrorized by these criminals, and they're fearful for themselves and their families. So it's a channel to allow them to directly give information, and then maybe make some extra money on the side, which is always helpful.
Fantastic. Troy Hillman's book, Chasing Down the Zombie Hunters, is available everywhere. It's available on Amazon. It's a fantastic read. I recommend it to everybody. Well, that wraps up our very first episode of the Silent Report. Thank you to our very special guest, Troy Hillman.
Rab, thanks for having me. It was great to be here.
We're very excited to have you here, Troy. Stay connected by following Silent Witness on social media for more stories, updates, and episodes. We have an exciting season ahead. Until next time, thank you for watching the Silent Report. I'm very proud to be part of the organization that made this podcast possible. For those who may be unfamiliar, Silent Witness is an anonymous tip line that offers rewards for information that leads to arrests. Each week, we receive numerous cases that we share with the public in hopes of generating tips that help move investigations forward. In addition to supporting active cases, Silent Witness leads safety awareness and prevention efforts across Arizona, all with the goal of creating safer communities. Highlighting cases and sharing safety information is what inspired the Silent Report. Each month, we'll be here discussing new crimes and cases where tips are still needed, along with insights to keep the community informed and aware. Stay tuned, and thank you for being part of the conversation.